What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another breakdown type of video for the Detroit Lions, and today we are here to dive into the free agency side of things. That's right, we're changing it up a little bit. We have one last draft prospect to take a look at, and that is Hendon Hooker, who we really don't expect to see much of this season. So because of that, I feel like that also makes sense that we can kind of wait on that one a little bit. But this is a player that since we've signed, I don't think we've talked about that much, which is crazy. That's CJ Gardner-Johnson. Let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we're back to talk about another Lions offseason edition. Similar format to the draft videos. And this is a player that I really don't think we've specifically talked about in his own way, or maybe even outside of that very much, because it was kind of like we signed him and it was like, oh, we know that he's a dog. Got a dog there. And then we just like moved on. Like, okay, we got CJ Gardner-Johnson. At least I did. But I was like, man, we really got to talk about this player, right? I think this is a huge addition. We were all super excited when we signed this player. I did not expect to see that the Lions would sign this guy, so I was kind of shocked. Then they drafted Brian Branch on top of that, and I don't know what the future is going to hold for CJ Gardner-Johnson when Tracy Walker gets back and he's healthy, right? I don't know where he's going to play this season. I expect he's going to be on the field because of what he's done in the past and because he's worthy of starting, but at the same time, I don't know what his future is going to hold. He may extend with the Lions, maybe not because Brian Branch is here. Maybe he goes elsewhere. Regardless, he's only 25 years old. In today's video, I just want to talk about what the Lions are getting based on what I've seen specifically over the last 2 years. That's the film that I dove into, was the last 2 seasons, because there was a little bit of a position change this past year. Gardner-Johnson transitioned into a full-time safety role when he was brought in by the Philadelphia Eagles, but even with that being said, first off, I thought schematically speaking there were a lot of similarities, and at the same time I think it's going to be a very easy transition for him into what I think our defense is going to look like. And when you see signings like this, I think it kind of gives you a visual of like, this is what the Lions are trying to do defensively. But even when he went to Philadelphia, I mean, you're talking about a team that plays a lot of quarters coverage, but a lot of the carrying vertical routes, which transitioned well to the Philadelphia Eagles. I thought even the way that they played the run in terms of how they played it up front technique wise, some of the patience that he was able to play with, but he was asked to kind of play in the box. Like, he still moved around a ton, even though he was playing a full-time safety role with Philadelphia. And again, I don't know exactly what his label is going to be in terms of he's a safety, he's a slot, he's this. I don't know what that's going to look like for the Lions. But regardless, we've seen the versatility, ability to play different positions. And to me, it really comes back to like 2 things. Number 1, it's football intelligence, and number 2, it's toughness. And he has those 2 things. It's a former 4th-round pick back in 2019 out of Florida by the New Orleans Saints. So, of course, there he spent time with Aaron Glenn and also with Dan Campbell. And Aaron Glenn has spoken extremely high of him. He's brought him up even before this guy was signed to our team. He's talked about this player, and he's compared him to guys like, I think, Jerry Jacobs he compared him to. So we know the love they had for this type of player, and again, that's why they were probably like, oh, yeah, we'll take him. And it's probably why he was like, oh, yeah, I'll sign there on a 1-year deal. Then I'll get my extension. I'll prove myself, then I will get my extension. You look at some of the measurables. Now, this is back at the combine, so I'm sure some of these have changed a little bit. Just under 5'11", 206 pounds. I think the big thing there is 206 for coming in and kind of playing more of the slot role, then transition to safety. Maybe he lost a little weight in that transition. That's a pretty sturdy, bulky type of slot cornerback, if you will, and I think Aaron Glenn said it best. One of the quotes that I had here was that, you know, basically his body is built to last. So he's not afraid to put this guy in the box, so I think that kind of speaks to it. And then you look at some of the testing scores, the 4.48 40, 1.58 10-year split, 17 bench press reps, probably the most impressive thing that stands out there, but the 36-inch vertical, a lot of good, solid grades across the board there in terms of testing-wise, but again, I think what's made him so successful is the ability to play multiple positions, the football intelligence. You see the communication immediately with Philadelphia, pre-snap, post-snap, during the snap. I mean, during the snap, that don't even make sense. That, I think, is what helped him so much. It's what is going to help our defense. The defense that I think when you look at our additions, the defense got very intelligent this offseason, and I think he fits in perfectly to that. And then also you're going to see there some of the snap counts by year. 2022 was with Philadelphia. See 393 at free safety, 166 in the box, 153 at slot. I think that really represents the amount of movement that he makes defensively. So it wasn't like when he went to Philly, he just played, as the deep free safety all the time. With that defense playing quarters, you had a lot of rolling safeties, similar to New Orleans. Now, he wasn't maybe playing necessarily just in the slot as much as he was New Orleans, as that was his primary role, but he would roll down, play tight ends. He still did at times match up on slot receivers. I think there was even times you saw him on wide receivers. So he definitely still moved around, but it was more of kind of that safety look rather than playing as much in in the slot. And I think that's really good. It adds to your value, but also at the same time, I think you got to see different types of his skills shine. You're like, oh, I actually kind of like that better here. So that's kind of how it was for me. But I think overall, a lot of these skills kind of transition just really all into one. And then you see some of the coverage stats. Those are PFF grades. You see some of the coverage stats there as a safety. 6 interceptions stands out. He did miss some time this past year with a lacerated kidney, which just sounds awful. I mean, I don't even honestly know what that is. He did return in week 18, and then he also played in the playoffs this past season when they went on their Super Bowl run. And he did play us week 1, so he made actually a really nice play, probably a couple nice plays in that game. But there's one that comes to mind immediately, which I'll probably show. I will show in this video of him breaking up a pass. So he did play against us. And then again, this past season, or 2 years ago, 2021, you can see the snap counts, how they differ a little bit. Now, there's also a lot of D-line snaps that they put in there as well, so I guess you could kind of call those box too if you wanted to. It's just PFF, they have their own way of marking those things. And then also, a lot of the coverage stats look pretty similar. Completion percentage is lower, which I guess makes sense because it depends on like when they're saying a guy's in their area, is that the completion that you allowed. Playing a lot of quarters coverage, you could give up a pretty high completion percentage. I could see that. But you can see the interceptions lower. That makes sense. You're playing more coverage in slot, maybe more man coverage directly. At the same time, though, 2 touchdowns, that's lower, because again, from a safety position, you're probably going to give up more touchdowns than you would from aligning in the slot, where you're not always even getting deep routes ran against you. So similar stats. He had a knee strain in 2021, missed some time. 2022, as I touched on, the kidney. So with that being said, I don't want to waste no more time there. We got the background. I have the similar kind of grading chart at the end to kind of put it in perspective. But first, we got to talk about what I saw when I watched this player. Let's start there first, and I'm going to hit on a couple of examples as we go through this. So again, it may feel a little bit all over the place, but that's so I can give you guys the examples and make sure I'm not missing on certain plays that I really want to hit on. So we'll start right there, and this is with Philadelphia, and we're going to talk about when they played the Lions, which was week 1, and again, quarters, a lot of cover 4 look, which just means 4 deep. You kind of split, the field into 4 deep look. First off, eye and man balance. Now this, I could say this in a lot of different senses of his game. This pops up, but I think it's one of the most impressive parts of his game is the balance that he has between reading his receiver and then also reading where the ball is, reading the quarterback's eyes, and being able to anticipate jump things. You see how he demonstrates the route anticipation, steps in front of it, and he's not just breaking on it. This is another thing, and I thought it really started to show up from the safety alignment because it was a little bit of a different role. We were sitting on top, especially in quarters. He had a very good understanding of how the coverage was going to work, but also on top of that, you also had a guy that would anticipate route breaks. Now, he would do this from man coverage. Like he would do this underneath and off man. He always anticipated kind of where a route was going to go seemingly, but especially from the safety position, I think this was really like, oh wow, this looks really good. I think at slot can kind of be hidden sometimes. It also can lead to some really tough results, but when you're at safety, man, I think as much of the immediate issues can pop up, especially when you're in zone coverage, so you can kind of see like, oh wow, look how he anticipates where the route's going to go. Look how he steps in front of it. Look how he plays it like a quarterback would throw the football. That, to me, speaks to the 6 interceptions that he had this past season. I think he has very loose hips. One thing that came to mind, and this was a couple days ago when I was watching him, I was like, man, he looks like a corner playing safety, which I'm like, okay, that's kind of what he is, but that's what he looks like. Like, you think of a cornerback's hips for the most part, and then you put it on him, which he has, and then you put him at safety. He has very loose hips like a cornerback would, with a little bit of a twitchy kind of lower body. So it's like he looks a little bit different playing safety, what your typical safety you think of. He's not like your typical prototype, like, oh, he's the big guy that rolls into the box, or he's not your, Kirby Joseph, but he has very loose hips like a corner. Opens like a corner is what I wrote down. You see it here on this Giants over route, the way that he's able to open his hips. It's the Texans. You talk about another one of those, cover 4 looks defensively, and just understanding the defense that they're in, and you can see how they kind of have this double post type of look, and he follows the second one through. One thing that I did not take a ton of notes on because I think it was very clear very early, but it's something I do need to touch on. Communication. I think it's one of the biggest strengths of his game, and I'm kind of tying it into FBI as well, but communication is fantastic, and that is so stressed in this defense. He is great as a communicator, and that is, yes, pre-snap, very visible. Hey, I got this, you got this, like that kind of thing. A couple times they had some breakdowns specifically against, goal line looks. I think Kansas City got him a couple times, not necessarily saying that it was him, but defensively as a whole. He did got one time against the Jaguars. They had Jamal Agnew, kind of those like, quick kind of whip return motions where they kind of show like they're going to cross the formation and then they stop and they break back outside at the snap, and then they had some issues there. But in terms of just communication, communication in general. And what I like the most is how after the snap, he made it clear. Like, for example, so if something went wrong, he was like, or even if it didn't go wrong, but like there was like, oh, okay, we didn't play that exactly how we wanted to. After the snap, he's going to be like, hey, this is what we wanted. Now, obviously, I don't know what he's saying, but you can see visibly there's communication, and he initiates that communication defensively. So it's not just something that happens during the snap. It's something that seemingly is like, okay, we all got to be on the same page after the snap. Make sure that don't happen again. That is, I think, again, one of the big parts of his game that you love there. On this other Texans play here, I like how he's able to adjust coverage depth. Now, this kind of comes back to the eye balance between receiver and ball, basically, or receiver and quarterback, where the quarterback is. He does a really nice job of this. It's why he has so many interceptions. It's why he can also get beat at times, specifically in man coverage. But it's why he has some of those crazy picks in man. You're like, how is he doing that? He's not supposed to see the ball like he does, but he does. But with that being said, I like how he's able to adjust the coverage depth when the slot comes in his area. So he passed the linebacker. Now all of a sudden he's like, okay, I got this slot. You're going to see him adjust the coverage depth, finds the quarterback. So the quarterback, he can see what's going on, the pressure that's caused there. He's able to step up into this route and not kind of like let it sit in front of him. And then he's able to jump down and make an interception. Now, I think there was times where you thought that he got a little bit too deep in zone coverage. If that was like a middle field close look, maybe like a cover 3, I thought there was times that he would just get too deep into coverage and it was like, okay, you're giving up a little bit too much depth. Even occasionally, not as much. Split field looks, you felt like maybe there was just too much depth given up there, but he does have a very twitchy lower body, and I thought from a safety alignment, his balance was usually in a much better spot. Now, occasionally you had like slips, really in that Chiefs game where the footing was terrible, everybody was having issues with their cleats, and then Mahomes him with that no look kind of stymied him on that one play, but I thought from safety it really showcased like, oh, when he has really good balance, the guy's ability to change direction and react is much quicker and much more consistent. When in like off man, for example, now you're playing the receiver, then playing the ball, so it's kind of like the balance can get thrown off, and then you just kind of see some issues, I think some delays, those kind of things. Open field zone. So really when you're talking about those split safety type of looks defensively, maybe that's a cover 2 defensively. Again, easy transitions to break downhill. And this is what I liked about it from a safety alignment, really specifically here, is that there was very limited movement. Even at times when it's like, oh, the back pedal's not super smooth there. He's like a cornerback playing safety, so it doesn't always look as fluid, but it's very twitchy. All right, it's very quick, and there's not a lot of movement that he has to make to go from one spot to another. You saw it against the Vikings here on this dig route. You also see it here against the Giants on this option route on the far side. This one's probably a little bit different because it's not necessarily that safety type of look, but it's just kind of another example of this. So when the receiver gets outside here, obviously on the far side of the field, he'll give him a little bit more cushion, a little bit more room, understanding that there's more room that he can break. And then it's that field sense to step in front, but then it's also the recovery. Like he's not over his skis in terms of like, oh, you can't park on the brakes and get back. And speaking to that, it goes into the flexible lower body, the ability to slam on the brakes like a receiver would. I do think that you did see is that he will leave routes for opportunities to jump the route. Specifically here against this play, like against the Cardinals, you can see that he has to take this receiver that's breaking to this corner route. But even then, as he's starting to go that direction, he kind of like stops for a second. He definitely can get looked off. Like that was something that was clear. He can get looked off. He does good with route anticipation. He plays really well with, I think, inside the zone scheme. But this is kind of one of those things that if you have at safety, maybe you just got to say, well, he's kind of got to live with it, right? It's a little bit different from slot because maybe it's like, oh, he got beat in man coverage because his eyes were too focused on the quarterback, and that's just getting beat. But from safety, it's a little bit different because especially in zone, he may take some of those risks. Like, I think he's going here with the ball. He's really looking at this. And that means you can move him. You can get routes open. It wasn't like every game I was like, oh, he's getting cooked because he's not. That wasn't the case. But he does get a little aggressive in that sense. Like, if he feels it might go somewhere, he will kind of leave that route. He's not just going to play his assignment. He's going to kind of float away from that. And I guess that shows up in a lot of instances of game. Underneath zone coverage, he's willing to kind of float out of his assignment. He's not a guy that's like, oh, drop here and stay there. He's going to kind of roll around based on where he thinks the ball is going to go. All right, we give him a 10-yard reception. Dang. You get a turnover, the game's completely different. Talk about the ball skills a little bit more, playing the ball in the air, but I think from safety, you just saw quick reactions, specifically with his hands, quick reactions in general, man coverage, that kind of thing, but we'll touch on that a little bit more. As I touched on, though, eyes on the quarterback and route with great balance. Occasions where I feel like, okay, he's kind of like playing through the quarterback or through the receiver into the quarterback's eyes here in man, where I think he kind of starts to flow with the route, and the route may break instantly, as we'll touch on, and then the guy opens up. But, especially from a safety alignment, I thought you really got to see a really nice nice eye balance. Here on this golf scramble, you can see it from this kind of offensive line view, where again, he's able to kind of understand what the depth is, step in front of this route, yet at the same time, flow with the quarterback's eyes, step in front of routes that come across. And then also here against the Dolphins, the tight end runs the out, it opens up, and he hits the crosser. So you can see here, so the tight end runs the out, he's not necessarily just plastering to that. He opens his hips, and then he makes the hit on the crosser that's happening behind him. You get plays like that where it's like he's not even in his spot, but he's making a play because he has a really good sense of the field. Here you see the cover 3 break on St. Brown. What I like is that it feels like he's reading even beyond just like, oh, okay, receiver and quarterback. Like it even sometimes feels like he's reading quarterback footwork for a check down. So if he anticipates a check down is coming, it seems like he's kind of anticipating like, okay, the quarterback's here, the pressure's like this, maybe he's going to check it down. This is kind of where the ball feels like it's going to go. Or it's like a quick RPO. You know, that's an easy example, but it's like the ball is coming out quick. I can dive on this. It's that kind of thing where sometimes you get the sense that he's really reading kind of the footwork of the quarterback if possible while maintaining where his guy is at, and it can allow him to understand like, when do I need to get a little aggressive here? You see it here against the Giants. He's in a cover 4. He raids the tight end blocks. He does this really well too, like a shifting assignments, tight end stays in, that kind of thing. Now, obviously you get, I think there's like 1 or 2 examples where a tight end down blocks. He's like, okay, that guy's not there. I'm going to leak out. You saw it against the Lions when they hit Jamal Williams. They were in a cover 3. He's playing underneath zone. He jumps up, sees it's a play fake. Now all of a sudden he's turned around running back. Jamal's wide open. So you do get things like that where some of that over aggressiveness is like, okay, I see it. I got it. I'm going here. Then you get kind of slight breakdowns. It's not all the time, but you see those occasionally. The tight end blocks, and then all of a sudden his attention then moves right to the out route. It's very seamless, that kind of transition for him. I think you had a similar rep there against Seattle as well in Tampa 2 coverage. But really, that's what it is. Like here against Seattle, Tampa 2, right? So he's a underneath zone defender in this play, and it looks like, in a sense, he's almost matching the footwork of a quarterback, but he's never even looking at the slot, yet he still undercuts this route. It's like, that's the kind of thing where I'm like, field sense? Yeah, I can show you, not tell you. I'll just show you. That's what I get from that, okay? Now, one thing you don't love underneath zone, he can get a little shallow. Again, it's not like something that consistently pops up, but you do see it because of the way that he kind of plays. He'll get shallow. For example, here against Washington, right? So the tight end, as we touched on, goes to block. He shows a split zone type of block. So now all of a sudden he becomes focused on this running back screen, or swing, I should say, swing out of the backfield. Well, what that does, it leaves the hole over the zone middle of the field, cover 2 different types of zones there, covering a lot more ground. So he will get a little shallow in that sense when his guy leaves and he's like, okay, the attention's not there, now it's the back and your outside receiver. I'm going to kind of get a little aggressive. I'm going to get a little shallow here. That was like, okay, they got behind him. But then you can flip it around and look at a good example against Atlanta, where against Matt Ryan, you get kind of a similar look here. Now, he does get some depth and step in front sort of a route potential here, but he steps down and takes away this check down. He almost picks this thing off. He almost picks off this check down because, again, he gets kind of shallow and he's like, I'm going to take this away. There's no other threat on this side of the field. And I think that's good. It's the threat awareness, like how many receivers are on this side of the field? How many guys am I responsible for? Did this guy take him? Okay, when can I get aggressive? I think he will drop off assignment and flow in zone coverage based on the quarterback. Here against, I think it's Seattle. I think that's the clip that I'm showing here, where you can see, again, playing zone coverage, and then all of a sudden he kind of starts to roll off of that. The quarterback starts to kind of move around, and he rolls off of that. Now, where this becomes an issue is that as the play breaks down, quarterback stays alive. Now the guys are open behind him. He didn't turn around and plaster the route necessarily. However, it's not like he's just randomly doing this. And the way that you know that he's not just like randomly doing this is because, again, against Seattle, Tampa 2 look, DK Metcalf, I believe here is in the slot. He runs a hitch route. Okay, there's no other assignment on his side. So when he runs that hitch route and there's no one else to deal with, then all of a sudden as the quarterback starts to move around, feels pressure, he plasters DK on this play. So it's not like every time he's like, I'm just going to float around. This time he plasters DK Metcalf, tries to like take him away as the play breaks down. So you get that. Now, we're going to talk about the feisty competitiveness. But this dude is like, you kind of feel like he's fearless. Like, he goes at everybody. And there was a play against Gerald Everett here where he just like going at him. I mean, he goes after everybody. And it's like every single game he watched. And I feel like a lot of times he was kind of starting things. Like, I don't know for sure, but it felt like, he's kind of instigating here. But then I read, like, even back when he was with the Saints, that was a nickname. Like, oh, he's the instigator. Well, that makes sense. Every game, every matchup, you feel like, oh, he's talking to the guy. He makes a tackle. He's talking to the guy. He's blocking with somebody. He's talking. It's like, I don't even know what happened here, but he's going to talk to the dude. It's like a tone setter from that position, and I think it's helped him a ton, especially at slot, because, man, you gotta have some toughness to go down there, take on a block from time to time, fill a run lane against a run, even with Philadelphia, right? When they put you in the box, you have to be able to fill a run lane if you have to. You have to be able to get out there on toss plays, sweep plays, force it back inside. So you have to have that. You have to have that mentality. He has that. Anyways, that was kind of off topic, but I wanted to throw that kind of note in there. Look here, against Atlanta. Drops this interception again, another type of Tampa 2 look. Again, back to the Seattle game. Here's another one, right? So here in this case, he takes away the running back. He leaves his zone and takes away the running back. So now, without an assignment on his side of the field and the quarterback's looking there, he'll leave his assignment. He's not just going to drop to a spot and sit. He'll leave his spot, and he's going to go take away this running back for an easy check down. My favorite part about him in zone coverage, honestly, in general, is a lot to like. He doesn't give up easy windows. Like, I think a lot of times, especially when you're going too deep looks, zone coverage, like, you can kind of give up, like, the 3-yard check down and be like, oh, let's just go make the tackle. He seemingly does not want to give up anything underneath. And I think that's why he gets aggressively shallow at times, because he's like, I don't want to give him the check down. Don't give him the easy read. Don't give him the easy way out, right? He plays with that kind of mentality. That's what I gather, is he plays with that kind of intensity defensively. Like I said, he'll drop off and flow, but he attempts to stay close to easy window throws, take those away, just like the Atlanta one where he drops in front for this interception. When he goes down to take away the running back, he's not trying to give you that little check down. There was even a breakdown, I think it was against Miami, top of my head, I'm not sure, I don't have it wrote down, but he almost took away that easy throw. He tries to take away the easy stuff underneath, even in underneath zone coverage, where a lot of times like, oh, give it up, it's the check down. He's like, I'm taking that thing away. That ain't going to be there. I'm not going to make you feel comfortable. And I think as a quarterback, that gets you to second guess, because you're like, oh, he took away the flat. Like, that was supposed to be there. And then you might force something. I don't know. I'm just saying, as a young quarterback, you know, if I was playing Madden and the dude takes away the check down, I'm thinking he's going to sit there. I'm like, oh, dang, now I got to force it. You might throw a pick. He got a lot of picks. Consistently good balance and easy breaks. He plays very good balance in zone coverage underneath because he's not matched to somebody. When he's able to kind of float, his balance is usually really good. You see that by how quickly he's able to transition. And now, a quick note, we're going to touch on this a lot more. Man coverage, I really like him against tight ends. This is my favorite matchup for him. I think you get hit and miss results really in every type of coverage, you'll get that. But specifically, I think there's more consistency, more consistent success. And I couldn't find a great number to this, unfortunately. I was trying. I couldn't find anything perfect for this. But I think there's definitely a more consistent success rate when he plays man coverage, straight up man, and he's able to match up on the tight end. Obviously, tight ends aren't as quick usually. I mean, you might get like a freak, like, hey, Sam Laporta. Yeah. But they're usually not as quick as like a twitchy slot receiver. And for him, I think what that allows him to do is it allows him to match lateral movement a little bit better. Obviously, not have as much fear over the top, so he may not have to open as early as sometimes you'll see him do as well. Open his hips, try to turn and run. Also, closing speed is good. And you see that here against the Steelers, inside leverage, and then he closes. He's got good closing speed, okay? Now, his 1-5-8-10 split, I think really speaks to this. It's not elite, but it's good closing speed. And I think a lot of times he plays the game faster because of anticipation. He reads body language well from off coverage. And when he does that, when you see it look good, you're like, oh, wow, he's right there. He's all over that. Playing some more of that man coverage, specifically some more of the underneath kind of man looks. Twitchy slots, as I touched on, like here against the Giants. Beat him on the whip route, trying to match kind of the burst off the line of scrimmage. Now, for him, I think this is something that shows up. When you get some of those quicker receivers, you saw it against Tampa Bay, for example. He had some problems there with Chris Godwin, who's a little bit bigger, but he's fast. Like, that guy can really run. I think for him, what comes up is one of the more consistent issues is for specifically, I think his balance starts to lean a little bit to one side or the other, especially in the slot when you're covering a guy with a three-way go. If you're not playing to leverage, like that's super difficult because he can go anywhere. So if you're playing that straight up, that's tough. But with that being said, because of it, I think you'll see his body weight tend to kind of lean a little bit over one foot or one side or the other. And because of that, like if it's a jab against a twitchy receiver, he may kind of lean a little bit to that. And all it takes in a slot route, if it's a quick slant, it just takes that little time of space, as quick as he may be, it just takes just a little bit of him leaning one way and kind of delaying that transition. Either it'll make it a little bit delayed in terms of it's not as quick, or it'll open him up a little bit wider, and then it makes a drag really easy to convert. But you are impressed, honestly, with the recovery twitch in the lower body. Also struggles a little bit with contact balance through rub routes. For whatever reason, I think the approach to it was sometimes just rough. Like it was almost like he tried to do too much. Maybe he was like trying to avoid a contact or trying to lean into the contact. Rub help routes weren't necessarily his best friend, and I think a lot of times you actually saw him fall on the ground because of that. He's got average recovery acceleration. Again, for me, he looks quicker when he's anticipating and he's on top of it versus recovery acceleration in terms of when a guy's running away from him. You don't get necessarily that recovery acceleration, especially against a guy that's faster than him. You're not going to get that. And there's even times where I feel like he kind of pulls back too much, where if a guy's running away from him and he's like out of the picture, he'll kind of pull back and kind of just like, okay, I'm just going to kind of make a cutoff angle because I know I'm not running that guy down. So I do like in man coverage, especially underneath, is the way that he controls body speed. Now, to me, this is huge in two ways. Number one, if he's playing leverage. Number two, if he has safety up over top and he's playing a little bit more underneath, right? He can kind of pace himself and not necessarily get in a panic mode. I thought sometimes in trail at the top of a route, if he got caught in trail because he lost off the line of scrimmage, maybe he was pressing, I thought that could get him into some trouble because he would kind of like play a little bit over his skis, trying to get back into it, and then without maybe that help necessarily over top, I thought you saw a guy that could stumble at the top of a route, fall over a little bit, kind of lunge one direction. But when he has help over top, or if he's playing with leverage, like for example, Washington in the red zone, you love the way that he controls his body speed. He doesn't play too fast. He kind of changes speeds to stick with it, get in the shoulder. He reminds me a lot of Jerry Jacobs in the sense that he likes to play physical. He's the type of guy that wants to kind of ride the route. Like he wants to get contact, play physically. Now you're going to get a couple flags here and there, but it's not something that's like a big time issue. It really wasn't. One of his flags was he got beat on the press and he ended up grabbing and he saved the touchdown, but they got another first down. But they're at the one, so it was like, all right, I'll take that. So for the most part, he does a really good job being physical without getting flagged. He loves to play with physicality, stay connected, and that is a big reason why he comes up with some of the picks that he does, because he's able to play man, get physical, and it allows him to start to read through the quarterback. That way he's not just plastered, I got my guy. He wants to see both. Usually from off man, you can do that until the break happens, but for him to play it through the route, he has to get that physicality, get that contact, and when he's able to play with leverage, he can do that, so he can control his speed a little bit. Now, there was the one example, I think it was against the Giants, where it looked like he kind of missed going in for that, and he ended up tripping over the guy's foot. He broke out, had a big completion against him, but for the most part, he's really nice at controlling that speed, slowing himself down, speeding himself up, to just kind of sit on that outside shoulder. Now, as I touched on, I thought he could get opened up a little bit against some of the speed slots. Washington here, the short motion in, he loses leverage outside originally here. To like I touched on, I think he's more consistent against tight ends with a little bit less speed. You saw that against the Cardinals last year. I think you really saw it against the Dolphins. They matched him up against Gesicki a lot, one-on-one, and even with the Saints, like they were comfortable putting him. Again, the guy's 5'11", right? He's not 5'11", he's almost 5'11". He's like my height. He's like my height, lining up against a guy that's 6'5". It's like, how are you doing that? Physicality, anticipation, and that's how he wins. And then also from really good ball skills and knowing how to play the ball and not giving up too much cushion, as we'll touch on. But that's why I think there's more consistency against tight ends, because they don't run away from him as well. I think he gets his most problems when the shifty guys start to kind of move away from him, especially when he's kind of in man coverage specifically. Tight ends, it's a little bit less of a threat, and for me, it allows him to recover. And he knows how to play against bigger players, so you really don't get as much of that, like, oh, it's a mismatch, just throw it up. Against Washington, he had this pass breakup. He tried to hold outside leverage, because here he has outside leverage, but he lost it early, so he's kind of forced to flip around. He recovers, he gets physical, and then he undercuts the route. That's what he does. Like that's how he plays, and he loves to get physical. Now, I do think, as I touched on, the balance is where the issue pops up for him. This is why I think he loses a step and can get beat quickly occasionally, is because his balance tends to get over one half of the body or the other. And he saw it here against like New England on his drag route, where again, either maybe he's opening up wider in transition, or the transition gets a little bit slightly delayed, and that's all it takes underneath to beat somebody. Caught in trail. Okay, maybe you're playing with safety over top and you're playing underneath and you're kind of playing the more patient game. Maybe you're in panic mode because you got beat off the press and you're in trail. Whatever it may be, let's talk about it, because this is what I really like. I really like a lot of parts of this. I love how he anticipates upcoming routes to undercut. Now, I think when he's in trail without help over top, you'll see him kind of get a little bit more panicky, and occasionally get some really bad reps where he's falling over, trying to like, oh, hey, he stabbed here, now I got to go out for that, and then he falls over because the guy breaks the other way, and he's behind the route. But for the most part, when he gets in those spots without safety help, he'll work to anticipate where the route's going to go, and he's going to try to undercut it, because he knows that that's the fastest point, right? Point A, point B, you're going to round this, I'm going to go straight under that route. So he'll work to anticipate routes, and you'll get some where he's beat early, and he gets back to the play, recovers, and makes a play on the football. Especially when there's safety help over top. Now he's really good here, because he's able to really play patient, stick in your hip. You see it here against Seattle, this near interception. This thing is just beautiful. This whole rep is beautiful, right? I mean, the way that he sticks in this guy's hip. We're talking about built ball skills, but this is beautiful. Again, gets a little bit overly aggressive, as I touched on, but it's great body control with help over top, able to play a little bit more patient. And again, that near interception against Seattle, we have to talk about the ball skills here. All right, in trail coverage. I love this. I love this about his game, is that he doesn't try to allow much of a window at the catch point. He's not really early. I thought this was always an interesting issue, and he's not playing outside corner, so it's a little bit different. But like we always would, some like Okuda, for example, we had some issues with like timing. It was like, oh, he flipped his head around, and then the guy would like break off, and we'd have like issues at the catch point. This guy's really good, I think, at closing distance, closing space, closing window, and then attacking the ball. I mean, he'll wait till the last second, side hand, then he'll turn his head around, because he's not going to give you any space to catch the football. He's at very least cutting that off, then I'll play the ball. And I think that's what gives you such consistent results at the catch point, is that he doesn't give much of a window to throw into. The undercut routes, he's able to undercut anticipating routes, as I touched on. He can stick in your hip. See it when he's able to get hit inside your body before flipping his head around against Seattle. Here's the interception that he came up with. This is going to be a little bit more of kind of like the off man, but it can be press in any situation. It's kind of what I just touched on. He likes to get physical. So if he can win at the line here, for example, against Tampa Bay, he wins off the press. Okay, you see him match off the press here, get on top of the route. He's able to get physical, and he wins right off the line of scrimmage. So because of that, now he controls the route. And when he starts to control the route, he likes to play through the quarterback. He doesn't want to just plaster and man cover. He doesn't want to just put his eyes on the receiver and just follow him. Usually that can be like, okay, it's only this specific scheme. He's playing press man, and he's reading the quarterback. That's incredible. And here you see how he controls it, drops it off, and jumps this for an interception. This is because he's able to control that route, and because he's able to play this way. And for Tom Brady, it's not like, oh man, he fooled him. Like, no, he's just playing basically two guys at once here. He shouldn't be able to do this. Not in press man coverage. You shouldn't be able to play through your receiver and jump off and pick someone up. You shouldn't be able to see the ball. That's where you get some of the special. That's where you get some of the special for me for Slot, because he makes plays outside of the scheme where it's supposed to happen. It's not supposed to happen sometimes there. Off-man coverage, right? Now, this is a little bit different because Slot, you necessarily don't have to count this, but I'll just say in general, when he's not pressed up against a receiver, more than 3 yards off, let's just say that. Mirror match skills are there. His ability to match the stem, I think, is there. Laterally, he's able to match the stem early in the rep, stay on top of it, and that can kind of tie into the press a little bit there, but he definitely has the skill set to move laterally to do that. He plays through quarterback's eyes from behind the route. Touched on with press man, it's more consistent from off man because he's able to play through a quarterback's eyes from behind the route, so if he's able to sit on top of it, he can really roll through a quarterback's eyes, know when to jump. Now, he is susceptible to getting knocked off at the top of the route. He'll have like some inconsistent squeezing the top of the route. In transition, you'll see, you saw it against the Steelers, you saw it against the Chiefs here and Travis Kelce, some of these bigger guys, where it's like at the transition, he tries to squeeze the top of the route, gain control of it, and then, as you're going to see, even on sometimes when he's just playing the leverage side of it, you can see him get kind of knocked off, you know, get some of these bigger guys, and he's not in a really good position. He gets kind of pushed back a couple yards. Shows up a little bit is he'll give a little bit too much depth when playing some of the off coverage, matching the stem early in the route, you know, watching the quarterback. It's very physical within 5 yards. It makes me think of what, you know, Aaron Glenn was saying last year, like, hey, that's one of our advantages. We can be physical within 5 yards. This guy, like Jerry Jacobs to me, I remember when I first watched Jerry and we did like a breakdown, it was like Minnesota, and I was like, man, look at this guy. He's able to like get contact and not get called for a flag. Like, this is great. That's what CJ Gardner-Johnson reminds me of. It's like he's able to play through contact but not get flagged all the time. And for him, I think he does a nice job make sure that he gets his hands off at breakpoints. Like, he does a really good job of like, okay, I got to get my hands off here. He's breaking the route. I have to get my hands off if I'm controlling it early. So you don't get a lot of like blatant, like, oh, he's tugging him. Like, you don't get that. Now, if he's starting to fall over, he may grab a little bit, but you don't get like those blatant tugs at the top of the route when they're trying to break off, especially if he has control over it early. So I love the way that he takes advantage of that ability in the NFL. Again, as I touched on, it's kind of like zone coverage. Occasionally, he'll be a little bit late to the route when he's looked off by a quarterback. He does the same thing from off man because he's kind of going to cheat to where he thinks the ball's going to go. Tua had some success against him with that kind of quick-paced type of offense. You see it here on this out route that they ran against him. He's kind of watching the quarterback's eyes. He sees the route. It's not like he doesn't know where the route's breaking out. Like, he knows it's there because he steps there, but he kind of sits back just a little bit because he sees where his eyes are, and that just gives just too much space with a guy that's that fast. He almost gets back into it, he makes the tackle, but just a little bit too much space because he's watching the eyes of the quarterback, and that's what he kind of tends to do. But the positive flip side is that he reads body language well, and he can get jumps. Here against Tampa Bay, the flat route, Godwin, he had some struggles with him, one-on-one. But in a case like this, he can anticipate some of that body language from off looks specifically from man coverage. And here he's kind of senses that's coming, and he's able to get way on top of it. And you're like, how is he so far on top of this route? He anticipates that, reading some of the body language. One little note here, I thought it also he could lose a little speed when he's attempting to get that contact, specifically when he's transitioning. If he's trying to get contact and then transition and open up, it really happened against tight ends because he'd be like 5 yards off. And then as they broke vertical, he'd transition and try to shoot his hands. And I didn't think his there was always a ton of consistency there with him shooting his hands, even off the press. So sometimes I thought that could kind of slow his transition. Speaking of that, I thought his jam at times was just a little slow. Like, there was a good example here against the Dolphins on the goal line. Like, he gets beat straight up off the goal line. He did a good job against Gesicki in this game. But you're going to notice here, the jam, I think, is just a little bit slow. It's a little bit kind of drawn out. The weight starts to lean a little bit, and then he's beat off the line, so he has to grab and hold. And that was the right thing to do at that point in time. But what we like about the press ability is that he's very capable of matching off the line of scrimmage. Very patient in his feet. You see it here against the Giants. It's a speed release. Like, he's just going, right? There's no stabs. Some of the releases that we talked about in the past, he's just going. So he's able to match that off the line of scrimmage. You see that there against the Giants. But he's very patient to match that first step, which you love. He plays with great patience, which is super important from a slot role. Like, if you're getting overly aggressive, you're going to be getting cooked. Where he gets, again, the weight starts to lean a little bit. It's very subtle, I think. It's more so at the route break rather than straight off the line of scrimmage. The line of scrimmage, I think he does a really good job with patience. That's what I like. And I think from when he rolled down from safety more with the Eagles, you didn't see it as much because, again, a lot of times you're matched up on tight ends, which I think that's where you get more consistency there as well. Anticipates routes through quarterback's eyes, which leads to him losing some early routes, as I touched on. Slot man, he likes to kind of float through a quarterback's eyes, even in man coverage. This leads to great results and also some like, ooh, that's not so good. Usually it was double moves underneath. I don't even want to say double moves, but it was the herky-jerky routes, right? That's how I'll say it. So it's your whip routes. It's your jerk routes against speed, quick, twitch, slot receivers. So even if he matches off the line, he starts to kind of float a little bit with it. And you see that. So here, for example, starts to kind of play through the quarterback. So when the route breaks, he's kind of still floating with it, and then it takes off again. And all of a sudden, he's in a rough spot because he's not just plastering and putting his eyes on the receiver. He's playing through the quarterback a little bit. The other example, even against Zach Ertz, right? This is tight end. Now, he's a good tight end, but he gets to float a little bit. He's beat on this whip route back inside. That's something that does pop up when you watch him. Now, again, let's get into some final notes here just in general on FBI. I think pre-snap recognition of his responsibility based on his alignment. Okay, where are the numbers? Where are the threats defensively? What do I have? That's pretty consistent. For example, Chiefs, you see it here. There's a one-on-one matchup on his side with the cornerback. So what he does, he walls off the strong side of the field. Walls it off. Now, he would have been great on this one. He gets a little bit stymied. You can't really tell, but Patrick Mahomes no looks this pass back to Travis Kelce. Also, the footing was terrible. Everybody was slipping like all the time in this game. But this no look kind of stymied him, but you could see that he understood, like, okay, I'm going to wall this off strong side. I'm going to wall it off and cut it off. And that's the kind of transitions to be able to open up. It was just in this case, he got kind of held up because he's watching the quarterback. And if they no look him, that'll happen. I think that's the only time you'll see some of the balance kind of thrown off is he'll start to lean a little bit more quarterback than he will man. When his route balance gets thrown off, it's because he's leaning read quarterback over reading man. As I showed the Cardinals example earlier, didn't necessarily cover the guy. It was like, I kind of want to peek here on the quarterback. It's picking and choosing those battles is the biggest things. And sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. The balance will tend to lean a little bit more read quarterback. This is another reason I really liked him at safety with Philly, especially when he was able to roll down and get matched up on tight ends, because you can watch the quarterback a little bit more because some of the recovery athleticism matches a little bit easier, so it allows him to get his eyes a little bit more aggressive towards the quarterback, and I think it allows him to get a little bit more aggressive in terms of flowing into playmaking than read route. But as you see, the flip side, as we touched on, like with the Lions, where he cuts off this over route, that's the kind of thing that you get as well. So it's not huge, but it does lean a little bit more read quarterback than read route, and that's why you get some hit miss. But that's reactions to assignment shifts, as I touched on. If the tight end's going to stay in a block, okay, what do I need? Here against the Giants, tight end stays in the blocks, running backs leaks to flat, okay. So now he changes up kind of the way that he approaches it when the tight end stays in the block. There was an example, there's a fumble in the end zone, his tight end stayed in the block, and he took off after the quarterback. It wasn't necessarily a bad idea because Malcolm Jenkins was. There was an example, there's a fumble in the end zone, his tight end stayed in the block, and he took off after the quarterback. It wasn't necessarily a bad idea because Malcolm Jenkins was behind him. Malcolm Jenkins could have picked up the tight end, but he didn't. Because that probably wasn't his assignment. That was probably CJ Gardner-Johnson's. And when the quarterback picked the ball back up, tight end was wide open. Then there were also a couple breakdowns, again, like I said, on some of those like whip motions, those return motions. But what I do like is that he seemed to, even with Philly, as soon as he got there, trust the coverage around him. Like, I'm going to be here. I'm going to play this. You got to do your thing. And then if it didn't happen after the play, I need to talk about it. He trusted. He didn't be like, oh, I got to go over here and overcompensate. Like, nah, you got him. You got, and maybe even too much, you could argue at times he trusts his guys. Have to in this defense. It's a high FBI defense, and we got those types of players. You have to be able to rely on people to play fast, because for a guy like Gardner-Johnson, you'd be like, oh, he probably runs a 4-3 flat someplace. Well, he doesn't. It's just that you have to play with that intelligence and the anticipation. to make yourself play faster. That's how this defense plays fast, in my opinion. Now, on to some of the things that aren't coverage. Way less notes here, so we'll fly through this. First off, as a blitzer, it's kind of similar. What I think helps here is he's very easy to be able to disguise his matchup. This is where I think you get a lot of success. It happens with like a Derwin James. When you're able to align across from a tight end or a slot, and the quarterback doesn't know if you're going to take that guy or not, now all of a sudden it can allow you to surprise with a blitz. Whether you want to show it pre-snap and be like, oh, he's blitzing, he's coming, or you want to drop back. You put a linebacker in a slot, he shows blitz. He's probably blitzing. He's probably not going to pick him up and carry him in man coverage. So you have things like that where you're like, oh, he doesn't want that matchup. There's no way that this guy's playing that. He's definitely coming. For him, he can do both. He can do both things. It allows him to kind of catch guys off guard and change pace, catch guards off guard, like that kind of thing. Come from a lot of different directions because of that fact. And I think one of his biggest strengths is as a pass rusher, just in terms of success rate. I think he's a very successful pass rusher. That's a big reason why. You see against the Giants, see against the Steelers, because he has that versatility even against tight ends pre-snap where you're like, oh, he could actually be covering the tight end. Some guys are like, he can't cover that guy. He could actually cover the tight end. You get that quick like lateral twitch right at the tackle point, and it's really tough for quarterbacks, especially when they're in the pocket. There's a great one against Kenny Pickett. Those lateral jumps, you'll see it against the run as well, but here against the Giants, the puller comes around, he's able to laterally jump out of the direction of that guy, and he's able to get there. And he uses his hands well. It's the same thing as a block shedder, but he gets his hands consistently inside, and there's even rests where he's like, he pushed the running back here. Oh, he actually moved the offensive tackle. Now, I don't think he does a great job of necessarily block shedding in the sense of having to shed move always, but he consistently gets inside hands, and he knows how to avoid offensive linemen for the most part when he plays in the box and be patient and sit back and kind of sift his way through, pick and choose the spots. Those all things I think tie together to him being a successful blitzer. And then again, it shows up as a run defender as well. Even on this Dolphins tunnel screen, you kind of get that late like twitch reaction, like, oh, I'm going to fly over here and make that tackle. You see it even there. And that closing burst is real. That finishing closing burst to be like 2 yards away and then just like launch and finish, that's great. That is a great part of his game. And then some of the run defensive notes. In the box. This was something they would ask him to do. They rolled down the box and he'd have assignments in there. Now, again, like Philly, even like New Orleans, they didn't necessarily just play a straight up one gap, get up field consistently type of defense. So for him, a lot of times he tried to stay clean, and you saw that approach. He wanted to stay clean within the box, and he understood that. So he'd kind of play back, play patient, pick and choose his spots, when to fill, and then also really the biggest thing, make sure I maintain my spot. Like, don't leave a wide open run lane, and also don't give up outside leverage a lot of times. But what you like is that there's quick transitions for him between tight end, again, if he's blocking, where he's going, and if the tight end's not going to run a route, now all of a sudden I can shift my attention to the running back very quickly. You saw it there against DeAndre Swift, for example. He keys on the ball carrier movement. He doesn't, I thought originally he was reading a lot of the offensive line movement scheme. I don't think he is. I think he's more so reading the running back movement. So you'll see him really mash the running back, even as a tackler. Good and bad to that, he'll mash the running back like stutter for stutter, stride for stride, trying to make tackles. It leads to awesome pursuit angles because they're like point A to point B like that. You get some missed tackles because of it, but even in the box, he seems to kind of key on the running back movement a little bit more so. One of my knocks here in the box, so I thought occasionally he'd get a little bit overly patient. There would be a run lane to fill, and it would be sitting like right there for him, and he wouldn't fill it. He was being a little bit more on the cautious side, like, okay, let me not like make sure this thing gets outside of me. I thought there were times where he could have just went like strike, and it was like he didn't. You do like is he's not selfish. Like he could be selfish a lot and be like, oh, okay, I got to fill the, oh, okay, this run lane's there, I see the ball carrier, I'm just going to go get him. And then if he misses and the guy pops through there, you're looking back like, dude, what are you doing? You can't let that guy through. You got to funnel it back inside to the big guys that you're asking to handle this, to the big linebackers that are asking to handle the center. You got to give it back to those guys. Don't just be selfish and try to make that play. So as one side of me where it's like, oh, I wish he would just, cause a couple times like, oh, strike. I'm like, I don't have an issue with it because he's not playing in a selfish way and he's protecting his run lane. I can't really be mad at that. Open field tackling. Kind of open field tackling. What I'm saying is he will overrun breakdown opportunities a tick late to make immediate hits. So trying to time it up, you'll see it right off a catch, for example. He'll overrun some of those immediate like hit opportunities. There was against St. Brown. He saw it against Jaguars. Like catch and then they stop and they immediately like stop or change direction. He'll overrun some of those. And then they'll catch and stop and he's forced to fall on one knee. So he's already there, but he's like a tick late from actually making the hit. So he kind of falls down to one knee and collapses. One, he loses tons of force. Two, you you get some definite missed tackles when that is the case. You saw it against the Vikings. You saw it even against the Chiefs in the box here. Sometimes he'll do that between the box. He'll kind of fall down to his knee, make a tackle. It just loses a lot of force for him. I think he's at his best transitioning to cutting down ball carriers. Saw it against the Giants tight end. Sometimes you'll see it, on the outside, like Isaiah Pacheco. I think he's really good at just cutting them down at times. If he's not matched perfectly, just cut it down. Obviously, you don't get as much of a wrap up there, so there's the risk that you could just completely whiff. But for me, he does have too many missed tackles to love. I was kind of surprised with some of the missed tackles that I saw. I didn't expect to see as many of those. I think Brian Branch is a much more consistent tackler. On the flip side, though, this is a guy that covers ground like crazy. The angles that he takes are insane. Like, he's not taking the angle where it's like, okay, keep backing up, don't let him get over top. Like, he's going from point A to point B. This dude is running you down. And he almost never gets in a position where you're like, oh, now he's behind the running back. The angles just become an issue at the tackle point. But he gets there in a hurry, close distance in a hurry, continues to pursue across the field. Even if it's not near him, his angles are awesome. But it just gets into the tackle point where I think you get some issues there. Against like the Giants tight end, he had less make you miss, for example. Steep angles, closing on routes, kind of as I touched on, he'll get really steep on some of those angles. Again, you'll see him lose force into contact like here against the Jaguars. Now, again, like I touched on, he attempts to match strides. Texans, great example. He's literally matching stride for stride with this runner. But you can see because that he loses force on the hit. So he goes high and kind of just shoves into him. There's no force there. So it's like, it's kind of the balance of like, well, there you got to wrap. If you're not going to have a lot of force, you better wrap the dude up. If you are coming with force, maybe you don't have to wrap him up because you're just hitting him. Like DJ Chark on the sideline. Just hit the guy. Like Isaiah Pacheco in the hole. Hit the dude. But if you're not having a lot of force, you can't just bump into somebody. So you'll get issues, I think, at the tackle point. But the positive is there's a lot of flexibility, and you'll see it consistently when he's on the ground. If you missed a tackle, he'll get back into it and make it on a second effort, or at least get back to tackle, like against Washington on the drag. I mean, that was impressive. That's impressive ability to do that. Now, when an alley, he takes some different approaches. Overall, you have to give him credit. I think he takes different approaches based on the situation a lot of the time, which is nice. He changes it up. Like, for example, here against Swift, if he feels like the run lane is too wide against Swift, he's going to break down. He's not just going to shoot through and, like, risk that. But he missed a tackle on this play. He does throw his body at tackles when there's little wiggle room. As a touchdown, the DJ Chark one, the Chiefs big hit. There's not a lot of wiggle room. He's on the sideline. There's nowhere to go. Or I got help to my inside. He's just going to throw his body at him. He's going to launch into those guys. He's fearless. He has force when he's under control. You see it against the Jaguars on a jet sweep. There he's too steep. When he has balance, he has some force. It's just about lining those angles up with the tackle point more so than just getting there. I think is where you get some of the inconsistencies. But I think he has a really good approach to tackling running backs in the box. He doesn't go high. Now, he'll go high if like he's getting held up and he kind of just throws his shoulder into him. But if he's making the tackle, he doesn't go high. He consistently gets down, gets low at the ankles, understanding I'm not that big, right? He's a big dude. I'm going to go low. Like against Seattle, number 41. It's a big dude. I'm going to go low. I thought too many times in 2021 he was going down to his knee, again, hitting his knee first and wrapping, and you weren't getting much force, you were just getting the wrap, which is fine because usually if you got the wrap, stop his leg, someone could else finish it off. But I thought in Philadelphia he actually looked better in terms of he still carried a little bit of force. He wouldn't just fall to a knee. He was able to show some flexibility and go low and make some tackles, which was nice. I thought the form was even better. You saw it there against Rondale Moore against the Cardinals this past season. And then as I touched on, the pursuit is great. The angles, he does a really nice job of setting contain, getting outside, fighting through blocks. I'm going to force this ball back inside consistently. Like, you almost never look at it and say, oh, he let that get outside of him. That almost never happens. Finally, block shedding. Consistently gets inside hands, but he's missing a consistent shed technique, even against receivers. He's got some solid arm length, but I think a consistent shed technique could be improved upon still, but he does consistently get inside hands, and it helps him a ton when he's playing a screen. He needs to force back inside, play through the receiver, force it back inside. But a consistent technique to shed off and cleanly make the tackle, that can be a little bit hit and miss. Usually he can control the block, but can he consistently shed off and finish? That gets a little bit inconsistent in my opinion. But I love how he fights to set the edge on screens through blocks. He uses his inside arm, even against offensive linemen when he's flying into the box or on their outside leverage and he wants to stay clean. He'll use that inside arm to kind of keep him off of him. He's not going to stack and shed offensive linemen. So what he does is when he's in the box, again, he attempts to kind of stay back, stay clean, pick and choose the spots. Some of that also, I think, is scheme as well. Here against Atlanta, you see him sidestep the offensive lineman on this zone run, and then he finishes. So again, he's trying not to get into a battle with this guy because that's not a battle he knows that he's probably going to win. Here against the Patriots, watch him read all the mess in the inside, so he slides out of the box, running back has the same idea, and he runs right into him, makes the tackle. And even on the Tampa Bay run stop, Like, that's the kind of FBI that you love in the field sense. For me, the final kind of word that I had here, Saints allow him to cover big tight ends. Aaron Glenn felt comfortable. He said this: he is built to last. He got a body that's built to last, not afraid to put him in the box. To me, the D-line, they play big, right? They may play more than one gap. They will attack and react more so. They're going to try to keep CJ clean, but he feels comfortable still putting him in the box. He's an instigator that plays with high intensity. You see it as, again, like he kind of goes at Gerald Everett, but there's so many examples of this. And he would roll, even with Philly, into a nickel slot roll when they would go 3 safeties. And they would do that. 3rd and long, they go 3 safety set. He just roll into a nickel roll. So even though he was a full-time safety, they would put 3 safeties on the field and he'd just go to slot because they know that flexibility. And specifically, I thought he got more matchups on tight ends, and I thought you had more consistency when matched up on tight ends. And there were 2 last plays that I quickly want to throw in here. Here, as you're going to see, they're going to switch off everything defensively. It's why we need to be FBI smart. Notice him watching the quarterback's eyes, but one thing you'll say, he usually doesn't let guys get over top of him, if anything. But there, look at the ball skills, soft hands, ball tracking, and like this. Maybe you could say he's a little bit too deep, but you do still see some of that lower body twitch, limited movement, and he's able to break on this, and it's an incomplete pass. That's not to say he can't cover slots. It's just a tough task in general. We know this. We've seen through all the years, like everybody we ask to play slot, it's hard. It's hard to play slot. If you don't have help, it's nearly impossible to cover somebody. But to look at his numbers, they're pretty darn solid for a guy that has to play in the slot. And for me, the trade-off that you want is a guy that not going to allow easy completions. That's him. But has the anticipation to make plays, to play press coverage and come up with an interception, to make plays outside of just what the scheme is expecting. That is, I think, what you're looking for. You want a guy that's going to flash anticipation, blow up plays, be a tone setter, and communicate really, really well. I'll take that for giving up a couple of 5-yard completions because you're going to give those up if you're in straight up man-to-man against a guy with a 3-way go that runs a 4.340. I mean, it's just going to happen. So, my final grades that I gave here, as you can see, simplified this in general because, again, this is kind of slot and safety. For here, as you can see, I want to make this clear. I say man coverage. I gave him a above average grade here in man coverage. I think he's above average in man. I think he's even better against tight ends. So if you said he was going to match up tight ends all the time, I'd probably give him a little bit of a higher grade. But I'm kind of taking out and just looking at the pure man ability versus kind of the instincts, the FBI, the intelligence to pass off routes, switch off routes, that kind of thing. That's more for the FBI side. And as you can see, that's where I gave his highest grade. I think he's great in this category. Like, he's really good here. So that kind of ties into it naturally. Zone coverage, I like him more because I see more consistency in terms of balance, easier to transition, whether that's from underneath zone or deep zone. Occasionally he'll kind of flow out of his spot, but he's going to make some plays. So to me, it's worth it. It's worth that risk. Pass rush is, I think, one of his best strengths because he can kind of hide things, as I touched on. Football intelligence, communication, kind of tying those into one. I think it's his best strength as a player, and it's going to allow him to be successful really wherever you put him. And then finally, run support. He's a good run support player, just with too many missed tackles for me to love. That's the biggest thing there for me. With that being said, though, that is CJ Gardner-Johnson. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.